Hi everyone, welcome back. Well, our poor little Farmall F14 hasn't had much done to it in the last few months. I haven't had much time to get onto it, but we've also been waiting for a bundle of parts to get posted out from America. And that's taken an awful long time to organise them, but finally we've got about half the parts we need for it. We have made a little bit of progress. So we've done a bit of painting. The painting has been slow as well because the weather here has been pretty appalling and I've got to paint outside and it's just been far too cold. So even today we had a nice bit of sunshine and I got some painting done. I've got a big spotlight that I use to try and warm everything up before I paint them. And just to try and keep them warm for a little while after they have been painted. So we've got, while the paint dries properly, we've got another bundle of bits on the bench over here that have been painted. So we're gradually getting there. So today's job is to reassemble the cylinder head. And this has been sitting here for so long waiting because I discovered that it had a bit of a mix match of valve springs in it. So we had 6 springs this length and 2 springs this length. Now they are both Farmall springs, they are both listed for this engine, but some engines used a shorter spring than others. So somebody has used a bit of a mix match of springs. Obviously it's had a failure at some point. Somebody's put 2 new valve springs in it and ordered the wrong ones for this particular engine. Also, this is one of our new springs. This is one of the full length shorter full length old springs, and you can see how much the old springs have actually crushed up over time. So these springs are worn out and I decided it was time to just get new ones. So we've got a full set of new springs, but they did take quite a long time to get here. So I've just given the head a bit of a clean up again because it's been sitting around for so long. And now we're going to start putting the valves in it. Reassembling the cylinder head is basically just the reverse of taking it apart. There's not much to it. I have marked down along here whether it's an intake or an exhaust valve, just because it's got a bit of an odd sequence. Exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust, exhaust, intake, intake, exhaust. A lot of things will have intake, exhaust, intake, exhaust, intake, exhaust in that order. So just to remind me which way round they go, I've written it on the piece of wood here. We have all our valves still in our piece of cardboard marked intake and exhaust. These valves are actually marked intake and exhaust on the face too, but we want to make sure that we get them back in the same spot that they came from, particularly since these have been lapped into the valve seats. If we put these in the wrong spot now, they won't necessarily seal properly. So, as we assemble it, we're also going to be using a bit of our Lucas heavy duty oil stabiliser as assembly lube. Okay, to start assembling it, our first valve is an exhaust valve, so we want cylinder number 1 exhaust. Just give that a quick wipe to make sure we don't have any dust on it. A little smear of oil on it. And slide it into place. Now these should slide easily. You want to make sure that they slide nice and easily. We need our spring compressor again. And putting these back together is pretty much the reverse of taking them apart. Okay, so when we're reassembling our valves into the cylinder head, there's two little grooves up here. Now the collets here have two little ridges on the inside, so the collets need to sit down in those little grooves, and the spring retainer that goes on first has a taper on it. The collets are tapered, so when you've got both of them in there, that locks them up into place. So we put the valve into the cylinder head, the valve spring goes on from the top, the collet goes on next, and then we put the spring compressor on to push, the spring retainer goes on next. We put the spring compressor on to push that down. Then the collets go on, and there's two of them, one on either side. And then when we release the spring compressor, that comes up hard against onto the collet and locks it into place. Okay, so we've got our number one valve here. Next we want to put the spring on. Then we've got our spring retaining cap. We put our spring compressor on it. And we just slip the collets back in the reverse of the way we got them off. Just tighten that up a little bit more. Oh, that one is sitting in place. And these can be a little bit fiddly to get in to actually sit down in place sometimes. Okay, both of them are in place. And it's that simple. That's all we have to do. Just check after you put them in, you should be able to see both your collets sitting down in here. Just always make sure that one of them hasn't popped out or anything like that while you were putting it in, because nasty things happen if you drop a valve on these. So I'm going to go through now and put the rest of the valves in, and then we'll look at fitting the cylinder head. Okay, so we've got all our valves back in now. We've checked each one to make sure that I got it back in the right spot, just in case I mixed a couple of them up. And if I can roll it over, we've also checked here that all the collets are sitting correctly and in the right spot. So we're almost ready to put it back on now. So here's our engine block, and I made a little bit of a mistake with this. Occasionally, when bolts or studs get done up too tight, they just pull up a little bit on the top of the casting, and this means your gasket and head aren't necessarily going to sit down and seal properly. We're just going to carefully take this edge where it's pulled up off the block with a file. Now, yes, I should have done that before I put the sleeves or anything else in. That would have been a much better time to do it, but I didn't notice until later on. Now, either use a very, very fine file, or a worn out file actually works really well. And you just want to very carefully, and we're going to try not to get any filings down here either. We'll put a piece of rag down there in a second, but just while I show you, we just want to very carefully take the top off, and we want to try not to damage any of this other bit we're filing on. So as soon as we start seeing this getting cleaned up, we know that we've taken this down far enough. So we're just going to very, very carefully work away at this. No race for this sort of stuff. Take your time. It's a little bit awkward with the rag sitting there, but we don't want to get iron filings down into the block. Okay, so that's pretty good. I'm happy with that. That's now level round there. We've just started to mark the block back here and up here, but other than that, we're pretty good. Now, we're lucky on this engine that the head gasket actually seals round here, and all the other spots that it needs to seal are just water, and the radiator on this is not pressurized, so we're not likely to be leaking water out of here. The main thing we need to seal is the cylinder, so that we don't have gases leaking out of there. I'm just going to clean this up with a little bit of petrol now, and then we'll be ready to put the cylinder head on. Okay, so here we have the old head gasket. This is a composite head gasket. It's got tin on the outside, and it's got a gasket material on the inside. This possibly contains asbestos, so just be careful because it's an old gasket now. It has copper O-rings around all the water joints. Now this just helps it seal on these. It's also got a steel fire ring round here. Now this is a whole tin gasket. Sometimes you see them with just the fire ring around them, and this helps to stop the hot gases burning the gasket away. And this gasket would be fine to reuse. I've reused these plenty of times, cleaned them up, put a bit of varnish or something on them, stick them back on, they will work fine. But because we bought a gasket kit for this, it does actually come with a brand new head gasket. Now this is actually a much thicker head gasket, interestingly, which will lower the compression slightly. That's not going to be an issue to us, we're not building a racing engine. It's also a very, very basic gasket. It's gasket material, it will be heat rated so it's not going to burn, but there's no O-rings or anything like that on it. Now this gasket I think is the same both ways around, so you've just got to make sure you get it the right way up, and it can go on, it has to go on that way round, but it can go either way up on this one, I think. So we're just going to slip the gasket over the studs now, and just once you put the gasket on, have a look and make sure that all the holes are cut in it. We had a car come into us with a whole bundle of overheating problems at one stage, and they just had the head done and everything, and it turned out that some of these water holes through the gasket hadn't been punched, and it wasn't actually allowing the water to flow through in the right spots. So just have a look, make sure everything looks right, make sure all the holes line up. And this one looks good. I can't see any issues with it here. These holes here are where the push rods come up through it for the rockers and to operate the valves. All the rest of these holes are cooling holes for the water circulation. So I'm going to grab the head now and we're going to drop that into place. Now if you don't have studs, so you've got nothing to line the head up, when you're putting the head on you need to make sure that you lower it down in place nice and square. You can't put it down at an angle and then try and slide it around on there. This isn't a heavy head anyway, but some of the vehicles I've done, the heads have been so heavy I can hardly lift them. You've got to make sure you put the head down square, because if you try and move it round a bit, sometimes you can damage the gasket while you're doing that, and then you blow your head gasket really quickly. Alright, I'll grab the cylinder head now and we'll drop it into place. Now the cylinder head can only go on one way round. This end here is the front. I know that because it's got the water passages here to go back to the radiator. And there we have a slightly more complete looking engine. Now this is an original nut off the cylinder, holding the cylinder head on this engine. Now this would be fine to reuse. There's no problems reusing these on older engines. Unfortunately, quite a bundle of them also looked like this. And this one is definitely not fine to reuse. Now I've been waiting on some more nuts out of America and they haven't arrived yet. So I just went down to the local hardware shop and got some brand new ones. Unfortunately, there is quite a size difference on them. Now this means that the load on the bottom of the nut is not going to be spread over as great an area. So if we have a look here at the cylinder head, the big nuts are going to spread the load a lot further where they're clamping it down. The small nuts are not going to spread it as far. So I've got two options. Either I put a washer underneath it, and it's with that thicker gasket on. The bolt is really a little bit short, shorter than I would like to put a washer on underneath it. I'm still waiting on postage for some larger bolts, so I think I'm just going to wait for them to arrive. I'll put a couple of bolts on to hold this down for the moment and keep everything closed up, and then we'll put the proper bolts on when they arrive. Now when you're putting on cylinder heads, there are torque settings to tell you how tight to do up each one of these bolts, and there is an order that you do them up in. Now most machinery manuals have that information in there somewhere. For this engine, I have not been able to find any bolt tensions anywhere or any tightening sequences. So if you look on the internet, tables like this are available that give you all the different tension settings. Now these tables list a whole bundle of different bolts. This page here is for grade 5 and grade 8 UNF bolts. UNF is the fine thread. They also show UNC, the coarse thread. And they give your recommended torque in foot-pounds and all sorts of other information on them. We're just looking for the foot-pounds. So we have got a UNF bolt that is 1/2 inch diameter. So the recommended torque setting for that is 74 foot-pounds. So that's what we're going to do these bolts up to. When you're doing up your bolts, if you don't have a tightening sequence, you start from the middle and you want to work out to either side. So you do that one and then that one. Or actually you probably start here, do that one, that one, that one, then that one, and then diagonally opposite, and then that one and diagonally opposite, and that gives you your end two. You want to do something like that, so you're starting from the middle and working out evenly in both directions. This makes sure that your head sits down properly and that your gaskets, the tension comes evenly across your gaskets and everything seals a bit better. Next thing we need to do is put all of the push rods in. Now these push rods have a cup at one end and a flat at the bottom end here. A lot of the modern push rods have a ball shape at the bottom end. Some of them are hollow with an oil line that goes from the bottom all the way up to the top to deliver oil to the rockers. These are pretty plain push rods. Now we're going to put a bit of assembly lube on the bottom before we put them in, and we'll put a little dollop in this cup up here too. I don't keep these in any particular order because we will set the valve clearances afterwards. So we just drop them in down here, and you can sort of feel when they drop right down into the cam follower down here. So I'm going to put the rest of them in now, and then we'll get ready to put the rockers on. So this is our rocker shaft. This end with the adjustable bolts and the ball nuts on them, or ball bolts on them, that goes into our push rods, and this foot end here sits on the valves. Now this is actually a two-piece rocker shaft, so we've got one shaft here and it comes apart in the middle like that. There's an oil gallery up through the middle here, and I think it pushes oil down and out through little holes here, but it's also oiled from the top, and there's a felt mat that sits across the top of these to help get oil down these little holes here. So we're going to sit this into place next. So there's a little notch in the shaft where this bolt comes up through, and you've just got to make sure that you get the shaft in the right spot. Otherwise it won't drop down onto the bolt properly. Then we've got to make sure we get all of these up the right way. Now this is still just sitting in place. I haven't got the nuts on it to hold it down yet, but because we've got that thicker head gasket on it than the original one, and we don't have the head pulled down yet, we don't have this pulled down, they all have absolutely huge valve clearances. So once we get the right head bolts and get everything pulled down, we're going to adjust them for the thickness of the head gasket before we put the rocker cover and everything on for the final time. Well, it's nice to have finally made a little bit more progress on our F14 motor. I'd hoped we would have got a little bit further, but we've now got to wait for some more parts again before we can get much further. I hope you've enjoyed this little video. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye!